Let me read to you a passage from the 8th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 1 to 4. It's the Gospel for Friday of the 12th week in Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, "When he came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.' Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. 'I am willing,' he said, 'be clean.' Immediately he was cured of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, 'See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them.'" That's from Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 to 4. What does it suggest to us? Well, St. John states in his prologue, the prologue of his Gospel, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We have beheld his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father. John chapter 1, verse 14. The glory that was beheld in Jesus Christ was not a spectacle of mere physical, aesthetic, intellectual, or some such glory. It was preeminently a moral glory, a moral splendor that was full of grace and truth. Jesus Christ was divine holiness incarnate, and the religion he revealed was especially a religion of eminent morality and holiness for those who embraced it. Now, this distinctively high moral life ought not be taken for granted as if it was to be naturally expected of any religion. Indeed, it ought not be taken for granted even of the very gods of man's religions. For example, St. Bede, the Anglo-Saxon scholar and monk of the 8th century, described his own ancestors as a warlike, barbarous, and pagan people. He does not name the gods of their religions, except summarily to denote those pre-Christian religions as the worship of demons. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing half a millennium before Bede, tells us that the German barbarians, worshipped an earth goddess and two gods of war. The Viking scholar Magnus Magnusson stated that the Angles and Saxons worshipped Woden, venerated as the ancestor of the Hengist and Horsa, the legendary founders of the English nation, and that most of the early Saxon kings claimed descent from Woden. These gods were primitive and bloodthirsty. Tacitus tells us that human sacrifices were offered to Woden. Adam of Bremen, writing in the 10th century, describes the worship of Odin at Uppsala in Sweden. He reports that of every living thing that is male, 9 heads are offered, with the blood that is customary to placate gods of this sort. They hang the bodies in the sacred grove that adjoins the temple. On each day they offer a man along with other living beings in such a number that in the course of the 9 days they will have made offerings of 72 creatures. We notice how their gods were to be placated. Magnusson tells us that the Viking god Thor, the god of thunder, was known by the Anglo-Saxons as Thunor. He was the god of the sky, ruler of storms and tempests, and was the god of the ordinary people. Kiu and the goddess Frigg were also among the deities they worshipped. It seems clear that the gods of the pagan Saxons were primitive and barbaric, demanding human sacrifice in order to avert the disasters they might otherwise bring upon their people through defeat in battle, storm or tempest, or failure of the harvest. There is literary evidence of this in 2 manuscripts now in the British Museum, which give details of the correct ritual and spell for various occasions. Now, while these pagan beliefs were superstitious and primitive, it does not mean that they simply reflected the rational capacity of the best of their societies, nor their best moral aspirations. In one of the most poetic passages in his book on the history of the English, St. Bede reports one of King Edwin's advisers saying to him the following: "When we compare the present life of man on earth to that time of which we have no knowledge, it seems to me like the swift flight of a single sparrow through the banqueting hall, where you are sitting at dinner on a winter's day with your thanes and counsellors. In the midst there is a comforting fire to warm the hall. Outside the storms of winter rain or snow are raging. This sparrow flies swiftly in through one door of the hall and out through another. While he is inside, he is safe from the winter storms, but after a few moments of comfort, he vanishes from sight into the wintry world from which he came. Even so, man appears on earth for a little while, but of what went before this life, or of what follows, we know nothing. Therefore, if this new teaching has brought any more certain knowledge, it seems only right that we should follow it." On another occasion, Bede tells us that the chief priest advised the following: "Your Majesty, let us give careful consideration to this new teaching, for I frankly admit that the religion we have hitherto professed seems valueless and powerless." That is to say, what the Christian teaching manifestly offered was the splendor of an exalted morality as well as an objective transcendent truth. This was proclaimed as being present in the person of Jesus Christ, in whom is the fullness of the Godhead bodily. The gods of natural religion were not a very moral lot, and not much could be said for the truth of their promises. The Christian faith as proclaimed by Christ's Catholic Church is good news for the spirit of man who longs for the splendor of God, all too often without realizing it. All this brings us to our gospel passage I read earlier from Matthew chapter 8, verse 1 to 4. Our Lord has come down from the mountain where, as the new Moses, he proclaimed his new law. The crowds were astonished at his teaching, as would the later pagan Anglo-Saxons, for he taught them as one having authority. Matthew chapter 7, verse 28 to 29. A leper came to him, and in his helplessness he represents fallen man across the ages. "If you will, you can make me clean," he said. The leper longs for one in whom there resides the splendor of goodness and truth. For such a one is his salvation. He will not be disappointed. "I will be clean." Christ is the splendor of God, full of grace and truth. In him we find our life, for he is the way, the truth, and the life, the only name by which men are saved.